mean, that's an intro if I've ever heard one. Chris, thanks so much for joining me today. First off, I love these types of interviews because to become a franchisee is quite a remarkable thing in business. And your story is awesome because I know some of it, and I'm looking forward to hearing it from your mouth. So let's start there. How did you accidentally fall into franchising? What was your pathway, this special journey into becoming a franchise owner?
It was accidental. I worked the latter part of my college career in some restaurants, and in pursuit of an accounting degree. I thought that was going to be the career path. Having worked in the restaurants, I really enjoyed it. Graduated, went on to pursue an accounting, career, if you will. I did that for about a year and a half. I was thinking about being a CPA while moonlighting at the Melting Pot on the weekends. And so I kind of had this battle in my head of which one I preferred. And Melting Pot helped me decide that because I was offered a management position. So I was like, well, this is technically a career, so I can kind of set my sights on that. And then shortly thereafter, the idea of franchising in Melting Pot came into play. So really set the focus on that. And it was at the time pretty attainable. It only took us about a year and a half to go from start to finish and achieving that.
How long has this journey gone on for?
Well, I got my start with Melting Pot in the year 2001, as I was graduating college. It took me about 5 years from server through the ranks of manager to get into the ownership side of it. And then since that, it's been 17, almost 18 years in the franchise side of it.
I mean, if that doesn't show validation, if you've stuck it out this long, I don't know what has or what would. But if you were, or when you backcast and you think about how fast your career has gone in a blink of an eye, how do you reflect on it?
I mean, I think it's been just divine intervention in some way. It was not something I set out to do, but usually I think that's how you end up in your best places. It's just, it comes naturally. I don't think that there's ever been a time I've looked back and been like, I don't enjoy doing this. I really do enjoy it. And I feel like I'm blessed, and I'm one of those lucky few that can say they like what they do for a career. It's allowed me some opportunities to kind of utilize other aspects of my brain that I don't think that I would ever been given a chance to do so. So it's always challenging. I think that is what keeps it interesting, that there's a challenge around every corner. And as soon as you think you've got something licked, there's a new set of challenges. So it keeps it refreshing. You never get bored in the restaurants. But I'm super happy with the progress that we've made. I think that's also allowed it not to be boring, is that we've continually to progress, and we've gotten better at this through the years.
So for people that are watching this, that hear server to franchise owner, and the Melting Pot is not a low cost, low investment franchise. It was one that takes capital. It's a capital intensive, and obviously the returns can align with what you put into the business. But to hear server to owner, did you need catch some breaks along the way, or how did you find your people and your supporters along that process and along that journey?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be breaks. You catch good breaks along the way. And that is exactly what happened, right? I had a business partner who he had some means that could help him. I happened to be a manager, so I was privy to some of the P&L and the background of the businesses, of which I could take to investors who are my parents and show them that, these things really work and they do produce income. So it's not a what if, but it's actually factual, right? This restaurant is a viable restaurant, and they have futures in them. So that was our helpful process. And, I was lucky enough to be able to, it took me some time. It took like 2 years of this conversation with my parents to get a little bit of seed money. At the time, banks were lending a lot easier than they currently do, or, we had to produce 20% of our loan, which we were able to achieve. I sometimes joke that I think I was 28 years old and I had no credit, but somehow or another we convinced the bank to give us $1 million, and it played out. Just time and place.
What does the portfolio look like today?
We have 4 restaurants, all melting pots in play. We have a little side project. It's a laundromat that my partners and I have delved into, but we're restaurant centric, so that tends to be our focus. Um, Probably in a holding pattern. I think we grew so much over the last 5 years that we wanted to really establish a strong footing before we looked at growth models further. We're actually in the process of remodeling our last melting pot. So all 4 of the melting pots that we own have been remodeled in the last 4 years, which was a bit of an undertaking, but it's also, kind of an investment for the next 10 years. So we feel like once the remodels are out of the way, once we can get a little bit more footing with our teams, we can go back into growth mode. And I do believe there's a few other markets that are out there that would interest us. We've gotten a little bit more picky in which markets we want to approach, but we also have our eye on what that looks like.
I want to unpack the accountant / financial side into owning a restaurant, because I would imagine that one, there's plenty of dreamers out there that say, boy, how cool would it be to own a restaurant? Some of those dreams hit a roadblock when they're like, well, I don't have the experience in restaurants. Now, obviously your needing of a job in college helps guide you into that industry, which I would imagine a majority of people that entered the restaurant space almost did it as a way to pay the bills. But if I think through how you go from accountant to opportunity server to manager to multi-unit franchisee, it requires a ton of support from the franchisor to make that all work. Can you talk about how the franchisor in your story has helped you scale your own portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was guidance from day one. We were teamed up with what we would call a preferred accountant for the melting pot, and pretty quickly she and I talked the same language. I was sending things in, and she was like, "You really get the number side of it," and I was like, "Well, I actually like the operation side more." So it was good to know that I had a strong footing in the accounting and that piece of it. But from the franchisor's perspective, and mostly why I liked franchising was there was a lot of the moving parts that I never had to worry about, right? They would tell me what we needed to do. The systems were in place. And I was always really good at just following systems. And if you tell me something, I can do that. That's very easy. So I believe that freed my headspace up to really focus on the operation of the restaurant. So I wasn't worrying about menu production. I wasn't worried about vendor procurement. I could concentrate on unlocking the doors each day and doing the best I could do within the 4 walls. But then there was this other vehicle that kind of guided me along the way. So they do the thinking, ultimately you do the execution, is how I look at the franchise business.
Yeah, I could see it being intimidating for a first-time franchisee get into any business, and let alone melting pot. It could be anything, because you sign the franchise agreement. Now you have to be an expert in supply chain and labor relations and customer management and real estate and construction. Like it's overwhelming. And if there's not a great team behind you, then the overwhelming sensation only grows. And I've said this a few times when I've talked with a melting pot franchise owner. When I've gone to the corporate headquarters for Melting Pot, and I walk in that door, I'm like, taken aback at the depth of the support that's behind a franchisee. Sometimes that story can't be seen on a website or in you and I talking. And if I'm a first-time franchise owner and I'm looking for I want to be in food, I want to be in full service food, what sort of brands exist, I would want to land at a brand that has infrastructure behind it, like the Melting Pot.
Yeah. I mean, this is all I really know. I've heard stories of other franchises and how they operate. To kind of share with you, when Discovery Day is ultimately how you get your franchise, you have to go down and meet the team. I think we were as nervous as we could be until we walked into the environment, and then it was warm, it was welcoming. You met everybody essentially. And to be honest, a lot of those folks that we met on that initial visit, what I would call the executive team, a lot of them are still in place. So, over the last 17 years, we've grown to have personal conversations, you kind of move the melting pot aside, and you start to see them as friends or colleagues or whatnot. So that to me has been a huge value. And I still love going down to the corporate office and being able to walk in there and know most of the people by first name. And then, via email and phone calls, it's easy and it's approachable. I think that's the sentiment that most franchisees would give you about the melting pot.
Your story, along with so many others within the melting pot, is one of longevity. It's like you get into it and you're in it. Like your entire adult career has been built around the melting pot. Why do you think that is? Why? What is the brand doing? What's the secret sauce that allows it to hold on to people for such a long period of time?
For me personally, I don't like change, right? So I tend to get in a direction and want to stay in that direction so I can fully understand it and execute it at the highest levels. But it's also been a mutually beneficial relationship. So there's never been a reason for me to not want to do this, right? I've been supported on the brand level. I've been supported through friends and family. We've had fruits of our labors have equaled success. So we've seen positive results that drive us to be, more engaged. And I just really never wanted to do anything. I know I wanted to be a CPA or thought I wanted to be a CPA, but if I'm being honest with myself, the restaurant business always was very alluring. It was just one of those things about making a sensible decision. You're geared to go to college and make a career path that's going to be sufficient, but then you've got these dreams. And when I worked at the melting pot in college, it was kind of like those two things came together. And so I was allowed the opportunity to take a dream and work into it, but into a system that allowed me to be young and impressionable. And, it wasn't overly dominating my every thought. So I have a life goal of retiring around 55 or 60, but I don't see myself leaving the melting pot until I'm able to get there. My wife sometimes tells me that I'll never retire, so maybe I'll just die within the melting pot, but I don't think so.
Well, it's an interesting statement. I've had the same thought. I'm like, okay, when I'm in my early 50s, I'm done, or in my late 40s, I'm done. But I think the only reason you want to be done is because you don't enjoy something. And so retirement, like I can think through my parents' stories, like they were done. They were done with the politics. They were done working. They were ready to move on to the next stage. But when you're in something that you really love, it's hard to just quit. Maybe change the hours or the hustle, but you don't quit it because you love it. And I think that's part of the beauty of a restaurant brand or any franchise brand that you're into. And frankly, you hear plenty of stories of those over the age of 65 getting into franchising because they want to do something that they enjoy and that they love, and their hard work equals something. So, Chris, another thing that you said that is rattling around in the back of my head is, you're like, when I went to my parents, I said, here, it's black and white. Look at the numbers. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you've been in franchising for a long time now, and on a franchisee standpoint, they can see an item 19 and look at potential earnings, but it's not black and white. Is that where like the mixture of your backdrop in accounting started working? Because you probably weren't just looking at top line numbers. You were breaking it down to the bottom and looking at food costs and labor costs, COGS. Like, how did you get to that sense? Because that's a form of confidence when you were going to your parents and trying to raise those extra funds.
Yeah, with my degree, I had a background and understanding of how P&Ls worked, and I worked for a franchisee at the time who, as the manager, he shared with us monthly what the restaurant's P&L looked like. Right, that was a piece of our manager meeting once a month that we reviewed that all the way down to the bottom line. So we could see how the top line equaled the bottom line and everything in between. And we found those numbers to be true, right? I helped input some of those numbers. So I knew they were legitimate. They weren't being given to me in a sales pitch. They were, like you said, black and white. So that was my basis of it. And then living in the restaurant every day, I saw that there were working and moving parts, but there wasn't an abundance of all this complication that came with it. The melting pot specifically was a pretty easy operation. If you're talking about having no restaurant experience and getting into the management and then the ownership side of it, it wasn't as complex, I'm sure, as some others that are out there. So, the back of the house was fairly simple. You could see how these few things worked. And then you go in the front of the house and you would get this completely different sentiment where guests are raving about it. It's, the lights are dimmed. It's like a show. Like, we're putting on a great show, but then I go in the back and I see how simple it is. So that was one of the things I really liked about it. But then also they were profitable. And I mean, I worked as a manager for almost 2 years, and I couldn't recall ever there being a month that location didn't make a profit. I was later kind of brought into as we opened the store, we were told that there's probably 1 month a year that maybe didn't make profit, but the rest did. So that was a little scary, but there was just kind of one of those realizations of this is factual. This is how the real world's working. So my dad, he's still my business partner today. So I've not been able to buy him out. So I'm assuming he's pretty happy with his investment. But, that's what he needed to see. He needed to say, this isn't a pipe dream. This is realistic. So, and he kind of, as soon as I was able to show and prove that to him, he was on board.
Does that scare you at all today as a business operator? Not when you live in a world of black and white, and that's the way your brain works. There's still so much unpredictability in the restaurant business or business period. Does that scare you still, or because you've had so much experience with ups and downs and changes that it doesn't affect you anymore? Are you immune to it now?
I think I have a great respect for that. I understand that that's possible. I think the longer I've done this, I've realized that there are some ebbs and flows in business, that things won't always be predictable or perfect. And having had some instances through the years pop up where, you survive, you live through it and you learn something. I do now think that it's just a part of doing business sometimes. But it's always been at the front of my mind to be very conscious that if you don't play the game right, that there can be some dire consequences. I may have told you this before, but we bought the business in late 2007 and we went into the 2008 recession. And that was probably the best medicine for us, because it couldn't have been a more harsh environment as far as the economy goes, and guest counts dropping off. And we were focused, but kind of to the idea, I had a commitment to my parents and a bank where I was like, I'm not going to lose in this deal. I'm not going to waste their money. I'm not going to go in debt with this bank and go bankrupt. I'm going to find a way. So it taught us very early on how focused you need to be on the numbers and every operational piece in the restaurant.
Out of curiosity, I mean, you have four restaurants now, and you've dabbled in another business industry, so you've built up a portfolio. How do you evaluate scale? Because obviously, like you've constructed the way that you look at a P&L. You understand how much is it going to cost for me to build out a melting pot or purchase a melting pot, and what can I get from a profitability standpoint? I would imagine the same in the laundry business. What prevents you from scaling to 5, 6, 7, 8, 100? And how, like, from a mindset standpoint, I'm curious on how you go back and forth on when it's time to continue growing.
My personal opinion on that is that I'm an operator who's involved, so I want to be able to touch and see all the operations. If I scale it up to 100, I think that I would lose sight of that. Part of our success formula has been it being in the locations, touching, mentoring, tweaking little things here and there. So I don't think that my mindset would ever be to be more than 10 locations ever. I'm also a dad, so I think that's at the front of my mind right now. I've got 2 young boys that at least the next 5 to 10 years is kind of a more of a focus on them. Like, we can make money later, but I need to be a successful dad in the same vein as I've been a successful franchisee. But my gut would be at a certain point, and 10 is just a crapshoot, but that would be as far as we take it, or me personally.
Every franchisee that we've spoken with, whether it's on a podcast or just purely through our business, we've been surveying, and we say, what is the reason you get into franchising? And sometimes the answer grows over time, but it always has to do with family. And you said my dad is still my business partner, as you just mentioned your two young sons.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think about the way that they look at you, and do they see you beyond dad? Do they see you as business owner? Is that teaching them something? And then when you think about legacy, has your viewpoint changed and evolved on the purpose of doing this? Does it, and how it could eventually, the same story that you have with your dad, they could have with you?
Yeah, I mean, twofold there. My boys ultimately have grown up in a restaurant. They've always been able to walk in and see dad either working or going to a grand opening or something like that. So they understand that we do something that a lot of people think are super cool, right? Their friends are always like, your dad owns a cool restaurant, this or that. And I love that. And I love that notoriety. And, not just my boys, but a lot of my partners and my friends who are in the Melting Pot, for whatever reason, our kids love the Melting Pot and it's their favorite restaurant. So if it's their birthday or they want to take their friends out and impress them, they always seem to end up at a Melting Pot somewhere. So I think they're growing up in it, and they value what the Melting Pot is, a brand, and what it does for our family. I am changing my vision on this. So when I got into it, right, my job was solely focused on owning this restaurant and operating it. And my story is a little unique. We bought the restaurant. I got married the next month, and my wife and I moved and went into the full scale restaurant operations within 2 months of being married. So a few years later, the kids came along. So it was always kind of our thing. But as they've gotten older, I realized that I don't necessarily want restaurant business to be my legacy for them. I'd rather, my legacy with them being a good human and being a good role model. I always wonder if I want them to end up in the restaurant business, which I have no problem with that. I think they would be great at it, and I think it's been really good to me. So why wouldn't it be good for them? But I'll let them choose their own course in that. And I don't know. I grew up in a family that had a small business, and it was always just cool to have that business and that notoriety. But, you also serve a community. So you got to run it that way, right? You're part of a community, and it's not just this thing that you own. It's a thing that you actually contribute to.
I'm gonna give you my 2 cents on it, because I have two young boys too. Right before I quit my job and started the business that we operate, I had a boss, and I'll never forget this. He walked his kids. He had 2 kids. Walked his kids around and said, "Go ahead, say it." And they said, "Someday I'll be your boss." I remember feeling awful in that moment, and I've held on to that moment. And so with my kids, I want exactly that last statement that you just said. You may be leading a business, but you're ultimately doing it for your community. And your community can mean different things. Our community at our business means franchisees and franchisors and our staff. And so I think showing them responsibility there and gratitude is essential. And then the other thing that you said, like my priorities, I don't know that they change, they evolve. For myself, I was on a cruise ship 24 hours ago with my youngest, because it was a spring break, and we took four days to go into the Caribbean, and I still worked, because my business, I work every day. I work every single day, similar to yours, but I love what I do, so it doesn't feel draining 90% of the time. It feels enjoyable. And if I can teach my kids work ethic, and then they can make their own decisions when they're older, as long as I can teach them, be a good human, care about your community, and have a work ethic, I think that's the beauty of being a business owner, that you're able to give that. That's legacy, in my opinion. And then, if there's financial side, great, but that's the toolkit, that's my viewpoint.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So Chris, let's end on this. There's someone out there, they've watched this conversation, and I always say that brands will tell brands people do. Like, I'm going to watch you and say, that's a cool story. I want to be like that. And in my opinion, that's the entry point into making a decision to buy a franchise. But is there any additional advice that you would want to give to someone that's watching this on whether or not they should make the jump into being a franchisee?
I recently told some folks this. I think it's, franchises, I believe on some surface level, they're perceived to be passive investments. And I think if you want to be a successful franchisee, you have to get into your, whatever it is you choose to franchise. You have to get in and understand how it works. You have to work alongside with the teams to ensure that they're either following the lead or mirroring your passion. And I think that takes a long time. So to my perspective, it took me probably at least 10 years, if not longer, to get a team of people who worked with me and underneath me to feel the same way I do about the brand or how I feel about the restaurant industry. And now that we've been able to achieve that, that's allowed me a little bit of extra freedom to back off and to focus more on my family, but doing so and ensuring that the businesses are in good status. And I wouldn't say that I've taught these guys how I want it ran, but they've seen me in action, and that's the only way they know how to do it. So that's a mentorship mentality, I think, comes with that. A big piece of what our group is trying to do, and we've actually started doing this, is taking those long tenured employees and giving them some sweat equity or some profit share so that they can start to build their empires, if you will. And you talked about this earlier. I think my franchise visions have changed through the years, and I've taken on different roles within the company. And now it's kind of like a senior leadership role where I may not be in the dish pit washing dishes or making cheese fondues, but I'm definitely in the next stage of my environment or my career, which is to build all these younger folks up to essentially replace myself. So, franchising or any business is going to require your attention. I wish there were a business out there you could just invest in and you get tons of money, but I just don't know of any, and I don't know that I would believe it if they were out there.
Yeah, I think unfortunately in the life we live, we get to read the news of the lottery winners, and we see, and the news, social, whatever, talks about the exception to the rule more than the rule. And I think your advice is super important. Like, if you want success in business, it's going to require you to work, and you're going to have to work. You're going to have to work as hard, as much as you want to get out of the business. And sure. I think that's tremendous advice. And I think the other statement that you just said is do that with your team and constantly replace the role that you had. And that allows you to keep building up, and it builds your team up. And the last thing, and I think that this is true, whether people can see this or not, you can go from server to owner, from dishwasher to owner. Sometimes it takes a little bit of luck. It takes working with someone that believes in you, which obviously you're saying you believe in your staff now. You're paying it forward again. And don't give up on that dream. Take a step, show your work ethic, be a good human, and watch what happens around you. And I think you're a great example of that story coming to fruition. And I'm grateful that you were able to share it with us today.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there. I think that there's oftentimes I wonder how I even got in this industry or how I ended up being successful at it. And it was just, I think you take little baby incremental steps, and you're just following a path, and you're doing the best you can do. And, there's this saying now, like, why not me or why not us? Like, anybody's capable of doing this. You just kind of got to follow the steps to get there.
That's right. Chris, thanks so much. For Chris, I'm Nick. This is another episode of Meet the Z. And we're off.
Good deal.